Good evening to you if you've just joined us. My name is Cindy Mabi. And let's now tell you which portions of the findings in the SARS report were withdrawn. And the part on former SARS Deputy Commissioner Ivan Pillay, it says that under the guidance of Pillay, a covert and rogue intelligence unit in contravention of the rule of law was established in SARS. And the observation on then Finance Minister Trevor Manuel has also been withdrawn. KPMG says that it found no evidence that the Minister of Finance knew about the existence of the unit in SARS. And finally, Pravin Gordhan, or rather on Pravin Gordhan, it says the unit was established by Pillay at the time when Gordhan was Commissioner of SARS. And KPMG found no evidence that Gordhan was informed about the existence of the unit. However, it observes, considering his position as accounting officer at the time, it is reasonable to expect that he ought to have known of the existence of the unit.
I want to say the report by KPMG is not flawed. In fact, the report that from KPMG confirms conclusively, deeply so, that there's prima facie, I'm not sure that there's two words, prima facie, a double wrongdoing in this organization. That there were people who were involved in real serious problems that are not tax related. So I didn't find the report as flawed. On the contrary, when the report was given to us, it gave one goosebumps that what Sikakane had unearthed is just a tip of the iceberg. That is why the Hawks requested us for the copy of the report, which we duly followed the process, and that is why the investigation is continuing.
However, SARS Commissioner Tom Miyane says he doesn't think the entire report is flawed. And the auditing agency selective withdrawal raises some questions. Is it not suspicious that KPMG only chose to withdraw findings of the report specific to Pravin Gordhan? And did KPMG retract certain conclusions under pressure to shield Gordhan? And is it mere coincidence that KPMG's retraction comes close on the heels of Trevor Manuel and Jabu Moleketi facing questions in the rogue unit case? And is it logical to retain the facts of the report and selectively withdraw conclusions? Now, is it logical for the conclusions of a report to be withdrawn even as the facts remain unchanged? And here are some highlights from the contents. And there was a unit in SARS which used illegal surveillance techniques. Covert methods were used and equipment unlawfully procured. Then Deputy SARS Commissioner Ivan Pillay headed the unit. Ex-Commissioner Opa Magashula also knew of its existence. Allegations regarding Ivan Pillay's pension payout and dual contracts post-retirement. And the unit did not have dedicated officers, and members worked from home and held meetings in guest houses or coffee shops and members' homes. And SARS should institute criminal proceedings against Johan van Locherenberg for releasing taxpayer and SARS confidential information. And SARS should consider recovery proceedings for the fruitless and wasteful expenditure in the establishment, operating and administration of the unit from those accountable. Joining us is Udo Fruza, independent political analyst. Adil Nchabeleng, Transform RSA president. Nwara Okwonkwo is a legal expert. And Tsepo Khadima, political analyst on the phone line. Rebilizo Dezi is a former MK veteran. Good evening, gentlemen, and thanks so much for joining us. I think that the whole issue about whether there had been procedural illegalities, especially for a KPMG report that now belongs to SARS. Can you change what you don't like or you want to retract as the author of the report? I'll start with you, Adil.
I think the changes actually suggested are very dubious because they're only changing a section which actually contains to the report, which deals particularly with the aspect of withdrawing the report on the basis that it alleges that the former SARS commissioner, who is Pravin Gordhan, knew about the existence of the rogue unit and was actually formally informed. So they're saying the section of that part that he knew about, they're changing it to the aspect that says he didn't know about it. The minister was then informed when he was a minister. And as a result, it was only Mr. Pillay who knew about it and who ought to have actually informed the former commissioner about the existence of the particular rogue unit. So it's quite very dubious. Why would an audit firm, one, first alleges that there was a known knowledge, and then secondary come back and saying, we're withdrawing the report, but within the report, the entire report still holds ground, except for a section that says it alleges that there was prior knowledge. So it's quite something very interesting to look into. And this is something that we need to ask as a question. How come an isolation to a particular issue of the report rather than the entire report?
Okay, but what does that mean for the validity, thank you, of the report if certain parts of it has now been augmented?
Well, there are quite a few questions that really need to be addressed, such as, for example, who does the vetting of senior strategic key positions, particularly in the Treasury and particularly at SARS? How is the staff monitored, and how are infiltrators being monitored? How do you know who's infiltrating, who's not? I think that is very important to know. And would Pillay possibly become the next fall guy now for Pravin Gordhan is another question one should certainly look at.
I just want to go back, Mr. Okwankwo, in retrospect, if the auditors now say, look, we didn't have the necessary capacity or expertise of the team that was working on this particular investigation, we now, 18 months down the line, feel that the conclusions and the recommendations need to be altered here and there. What does that, procedurally, what does that mean? Is it even legal to do that?
Thank you, Cindy, our viewers. Basically, when you look at what we have today as a report, which looks at King 4 report, it talks about corporate good governance. And one of the key things you look at is ethics. Now, for KPMG to jeopardize their reputation for anything on the line, because basically I've quizzed over why would they come back and say it's substandard. So for me, I think something somewhere is not right. However, that is their own issue. But the greatest part is that this is going to be a colossal damage in the finance industry. One, the risk of reputation has been ruined. Two, relationships over the years has been damaged. Three, a loss of revenue for the company. For what? SASFIN has already severed ties from them. FinTech has already done that. International Institute of Directors. For what? Okay, so it bothers for me on credibility. And once you lose the trust of the people in terms of auditing your audit to be audited and doubted, then you've lost it all. So I don't understand. For me, basically, I believe that SARS should actually sue the hell out of them for that, because it has put their organizations at risk in terms of reputational issues. So they should actually come guns blazing.
All right.
And it's, like your question, it's actually not substantive procedural.
Okay, let's get a view from Mr. Tsepo Khadima joins us on the phone line. We know that SARS is intending on taking legal action for defamation or rather reputational damage, but we're not seeing the same reaction from KPMG International. It seems that the South African branch or wing thereof is being thrown under the bus with its executives. Mr. Khadima, do you think that this might even cascade further to other nations?
Yeah, we shouldn't be surprised that KPMG internationally is now seemingly paralyzed on how to best respond. And that can clearly be because from day one, when they came up with that unprecedented step they announced on Friday, they were effectively informed by politics instead of the practices that are acceptable in their profession. And hence right now, they are paralyzed. But this, if anything, once again confirms that audit firms should do auditing. There was nothing to do with accounting and auditing in terms of the SARS rogue unit, and why on earth we had a audit firm that has been doing forensics on non-financial matters is the problem that we have. And as I mentioned yesterday, and I maintain it, is because consulting has been an exceedingly profitable unit for within all the audit firms. And maybe in South Africa, the time has now come whereby we have to demand, if legislation is required, let it be, that auditors must be auditors and nothing else. And if there are other aspects of forensics investigations and all of that, let it be done by other firms that are independent, because the lines get blurred. But also corporate South Africa needs to stay out of politics. But for KPMG, I'm sorry I have to say, I think this is the end of the road. The firm KPMG in South Africa, this is on the verge of closing doors.
Please stay on the line with us. We also have Bare Bilitsotetsi, former MK, a veteran, that generally if you look at the contracts of KPMG, they're long-standing contracts that seemingly had been mutually beneficial for various clients. Why now would they want to forego all of that, having been in the country for so long?
Yeah, I would say that if you can do something once, you continue doing it. So we cannot isolate South Africa from the other countries where KPMG is involved. I would like also, there are cases like what happens in America. There was a company in America whereby they found out that the auditing of the books of the company and the identification about the people who are corrupt within the company, they were not identified by KPMG. As a result, KPMG was forced to pay certain money back, as they've done in South Africa. They paid it back. They paid that lawsuit back, and it didn't end there. Now my big question comes into my mind. Every country has what is called, let me say, USA Accounting Board, or Accounting Board Standard. To me, what does it mean is that because they belong to USA, why they couldn't identify that problem earlier on? Because you cannot just enter into my country, even myself, without actually playing an oversight role in what you are doing in my country. That's why, to me, it's a problem. Same in South Africa. We've got the South African Accounting Board. We've got SAICA, South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. What are we doing? Do we allow these people to apply the same method of stealing money?
Yeah, and it seems very apologetic from the statutory bodies and how they're dealing with this matter, almost a wait-and-see approach, whether the court proceedings with SARS will go ahead. Why do you think we still have that kind of attitude for blatant corruption?
Look, the whole thing simmers around the one aspect of it. Here is a clique of professionals that for years have been protecting each other and one another. So I wouldn't expect anything coming very strong out of SAICA, for that matter, to actually call off KPMG. First of all, SAICA is a smaller baby in comparison to what KPMG is as a multinational. So they don't even have the power whatsoever to can speak out and actually determine as to what should their members do. These members are corporate institutions with very big purses, with very big capital and cash. So when you have an institute like South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, you're not really going to be effective, because the individuals sitting on there first have to protect the profession and the professionals first before they can get into their aspect of ethics. Whereas it's supposed to be the reverse. Ethics, morality, and aspect of applying principles should come first. South Africans have been had by these many firms. Today, we still don't have black firms that have emerged that can compete on the same basis with the likes of KPMG and
or maybe they lack the opportunity.
And they lack the opportunity, but they never get opportunities. Why? Because the government always puts a prerequisite to say, do you have the requisite experience? Do you have the likes of the KPMG in your partnership? If you do not have any of that prerequisite, then you are disqualified. So it actually plays down the aspect of transformation in South Africa. So government must take a decisive decision to say, now because we have found out that the experience and the quality of work provided is similar to the people who have already qualified and have an experience but are not bigger than KPMG. Those are the companies that should be given priority and preference. We have just seen it in this report where there's auditing and forensic firms can manipulate reports. What do you do going forward?
Let's just look at the partial retraction, and especially if you take out the conclusion, because a report would have to come to some remedial action or the next step forward. Can the facts still stand without the suggestion, the remedial action or conclusion?
Two things need to happen in South Africa today with regards to the KPMG case and matter. One, we need to see clear arrests starting off. We need to see the police, we need to see the Hawks, we need to see the Special Investigative Unit, we need to see South African law being applied, not assumed to be a law that exists. Right now, there's an assumption that we have a legal framework that punishes criminality, but in essence, it does not punish corporate criminality. So we want to see action. From a transformative point of view, if you say people must change actions and must actually rehabilitate, let's show it by a practical example, by taking those that have the ability and the privilege into account, like we do with ordinary petty criminals. Let's do it with these corporations and the directors in these companies. They must be held reliable.
And especially the involvement of certain executives, based on the Sikhakhane report, that the rogue unit did exist, it was unlawful, it violated the privacy and rights of certain individuals and the SARS HR policy. And yet we find with the KPMG, the conclusions that essentially had said, as an accounting officer, former finance minister ought to have known, and that's the part that has been taken out, Udo. I mean, if it's not to cover up, why else would that part be extracted 18 months later?
Indeed, you're very correct there. There are two things that one should not forget in this country, particularly in South Africa, is the history of the information scandal, when billions were taken out since 1976 until 94 and beyond, and where Dr. Connie Mulder and Dr. Ashley Rudy oversaw all that. There was something like 12, 15 banks involved, mainly European banks, and the South African Reserve Bank was part of it. So it was reported, and that is part of the history. And at the same time, don't forget, we have got an economy that is structured as an exclusive, oligopolistic, warehouse and rent-seeking economy. To penetrate that economy that's self-protective is almost impossible. They've made it's watertight. That makes it very, very difficult if you want to get a foot into the door.
Mr. Okonkwo, would you also suggest that this feeds into the narrative that this is essentially about preserving the current status quo of the haves and the rich and those that have benefited from the wealth of this country in not wanting to share the economy?
Yeah, there's a possible degeneration to that. Basically, I would say if they want to do that at the expense of a household name, and they would go for that, for me, that is colossal stupidity. But it has happened. How do you recall back the clock? You're rescinding a report that has led to the removal in recommendations of senior officials and also the company CEO. How do you begin to say it was substandard? So it becomes a very, very, very credible issue, which for me, in as much as the analysts are saying that KPMG in the months to come should do damage control, but they don't see it closing shop like Bell Pottinger. For me, let me be honest with you, credible organizations would distance themselves, whether they try to come back or not, from KPMG. And it's happening. Because once we cannot rely on you, you are gone. The same thing actually happened. You see, when you talk about credibility, it's everything that surrounds a brand. KPMG is a brand name. Over the years, people have believed that when you do a forensic audit, it is what you say it is. For instance, Oxford, as an institution of learning, St. Mary College, Harvard, when they produce graduates, they are who they say they are. And if it becomes to change, everything automatically slides. So it could be like what you said, yes. The status quo could be maintained at all costs. It doesn't care who is. But I find it to be extremely petty. I'm sorry to use the word, highly irresponsible for a former finance minister to be so petty in his comment, in his attitudinal disposition on issues. Why would he be saying that KPMG should actually contact the individual involved and give an unreserved apology? What happens to those that were sacked on the recommendation that was substandard? I mean, I respect people that have charisma. I respect people that falter under what we call the first laws of integrity. What is it in for you? They remove you as finance minister, you go to court. Is the government your own? Why are you not talking about Absa debacle that happened under your nose? So it is, for me, the white monopoly capital issue. The status quo must be maintained at all costs. We don't care whose ox is God.
Yeah. All right, Sepo, do you share that view as well? Because what would be the logic of withdrawing certain parts, the conclusions of a report, but still maintaining the body or the greater content of it?
Look, KPMG got exceedingly bad legal advice. Right now, their status is non-existent as far as the report is concerned, because they would know that they are functus officio. So it is amazing that for some reason they believe that they can still have a say on the report that has been final, delivered, and paid for. That is flabbergasting. But as I say, that they've received bad legal advice. The report or the aspects of the report are no longer withdrawable, and any action or any course of action that emanates from their report, really, they have no responsibility or any role to play howsoever. And it is flabbergasting that they have chosen to selectively withdraw certain aspects, but it clearly demonstrates that somebody somewhere has been putting them under unprecedented, undue, and unlawful pressure. What we should be asking is that those executives that have been fired, they must please confess as to who has been putting them under this unprecedented pressure, which is unlawful, so that proper action can then follow against those people that have acted unlawfully in bringing this undue pressure to bear. And also as to what did they have to benefit, that specific sections that related specifically to the former Minister of Finance, Mr. Pravin Gordhan, that those aspects needed to have been withdrawn when, in fact, the buck stopped with him. He was both the executive authority as well as the accounting officer at SARS. It cannot be that he didn't know. He knew, and therefore he must be held to account. There is nothing that can be done to save him, and he must face the music. The day of reckoning has come. He has to be held accountable.
All right, Sepo, thanks so much. Sepo Khadima, political analyst, joining us on the phone line. Are we likely to see that level of accountability? Because there's already a level of separation where some would say, look, I wasn't aware, as in the case of former finance minister.
The only way is to go through the criminal route. We have a Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, which should actually now be implemented. SARS should move into the criminal route and make sure that the ministers, particularly Minister of Treasury, as well as the Commissioner, are supportive of the process. We need to see Minister Mbalula acting on this matter and taking this matter personally and running with it to ensure that corporate citizens, which are companies, as well as directors in companies, are taken to responsibility and become held responsible for criminal activities that their companies are actually purported to be having. So this fraud of this nature, where reports are given out fraudulently in order to indict people, should stop, and corporate citizens have that responsibility.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Nchaveleng. I'm sorry, Kommissar. We're going to have to go. Adil Nchaveleng is with Transform RSA as the president. Nora Okwonkwo is a legal expert. And Tsepo Khadima joined us on the line. Bilitso Tetsi, former MK veteran, and Udo Froza, an independent political analyst. We'll take a look at the latest weather update, and we'll be back just after this.